Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And I got to say, I really love it when we have repeat guests on because it means that we had so much fun the first time and we didn't get to cover everything because they have so much knowledge to share with us. And so please join me in welcoming Chris Clews back to our program today. Welcome, Chris. How the heck have you been?
Thanks, Deb. I've been awesome. Totally awesome as always.
Perfect.
And I appreciate the second opportunity to speak with you.
I love it. Well, and we did. We had so much fun last time. And so we're going to have a blast this time. So let me tell people a little bit about you, and then we'll jump into this. So Chris Clews is a speaker and author of 3 acclaimed books on work and life lessons from 80s pop culture. Growing up in the 80s and with over 20 years of leadership experience in corporate marketing, Chris knew 3 things very well: 80s pop culture, business, and this crazy thing we call life. He combined these areas of expertise to create the popular book series, the ultimate series on essential work and life lessons from 80s pop culture. And I tell you what, if you grew up in that area, you have to read the books just because they're a hoot. He's spoken to a diverse set of organizations and companies, including Visa, DHL, University of Florida, UPenn Medicine, CMAA, which is the Club Management Association of America, State Government Affairs Council, DisruptHR, FuturePharma, HR Healthcare, Nostalgiacon, and more. In fact, he comes to us direct from a keynote presentation that he gave just a little bit ago. He's also passionate about animal rescue and donates a portion of the proceeds from his books and speaking engagements to the wonderful Wonder Paws Rescue. So again, Chris, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Deb. Really appreciate it.
Great. Well, for those who didn't catch your show the first time, tell us a little bit about how it is that you got to where you are today. And really, why did you decide that focusing on the 80s was going to be your passion in life?
Yeah, so I spent about 20 years or so in corporate marketing, and I really love marketing. I still love marketing. I still have a passion for it. But I was at a point where I was in a job that just kind of wasn't working out for me. And I was having a self-pity party of one at home. And I was thinking, I always mention the quote from Henry David Thoreau, that the massive men or the massive people lead lives of quiet desperation. And I was feeling that quiet desperation. And I wasn't sure what to do with it. So the Breakfast Club came on, and Bender says screws fall out all the time. The world's an imperfect place. And I sat up and I said, my screws have fallen out. I'm in an imperfect place. What am I going to do to put them back in? Am I just going to put those same screws in and just that quiet desperation? Or am I going to find a whole new set of screws, a whole new door, a whole new door frame, and walk out to a new journey? And that's ultimately what I did. Now I was 46 years old. And so I wasn't a young entrepreneur, young, in the sense 20s, 30s. And Johnny Cade from The Outsiders, another great 80s movie and a great book from the late 60s, said you still have a lot of time to make yourself be what you want. And I took that to heart. Like, I still didn't have a lot of time to make myself be what I want. What is it that I want to be? And I knew I loved 80s pop culture. I thought, how do I make a living talking about 80s pop culture? I can't just tell everybody I'm an 80s pop culture person and move out to LA and try to make this thing happen. And so I wrote a little book. I built a website. I positioned myself as a speaker with this idea of what life and work lessons we can learn from 80s pop culture. And it started with that one lesson about problem solving from the Breakfast Club, putting those screws back in. What do you do when your screws have fallen out? What can the Breakfast Club teach us about problem solving? And it went from there. Now I have the 3 books, as you mentioned before, and I'm doing quite a bit of keynote speaking. Just spoke to American Market Association of Iowa right before we hopped on the call today.
I love it. I love it. And it's so much fun. I'm a smidge older than you. But yeah, the 80s had such fascinating programs that they really were, whether it was TV, literature, movies, obviously music. I mean, when we look at some of the musicians that came out of the 80s, they're just incredible. And then when I do the math and go, oh my God, that was years ago, it's like, but the amazing thing to me is those lessons that were that long ago are still very pertinent and important today. So they're still resonating, even with the millennials and the Gen Zers who are going, Breakfast Club? Do I get brunch there? Right?
Yeah, and it's true. It's funny though that you mentioned the younger generations because, we all, I mean, I should say most of us, not everybody, but most people look back on their childhood and they become nostalgic for different reasons. I mean, some of us had a great childhood, maybe some people didn't, but there's still some nostalgia in there when it comes to movies or music. A song may have gotten you through a tough time, or a movie may remind you of friends. And so we're all nostalgic for our youth in some way. But 80s pop culture is really interesting because nostalgia typically comes in 30-year cycles. And here we are, as you mentioned, we're 43 years removed from 1980, which is shocking to think. But it's only getting stronger. This idea of 80s pop culture is really integrated into our culture right now. They just announced a Goonies sequel for 2027.
I saw that.
Crazy, right? Beverly Hills Cop 4 is coming out with Eddie Murphy as Axel Foley. Obviously, Stranger Things and Cobra Kai have huge impacts on pop culture. The new Dungeons and Dragons movie that's coming out, that's that really exploded in the 80s. And so we're seeing more and more of it. The new TurboTax commercial that has the safety dance for Men Without Hats and the guys dancing. It doesn't seem to be going away. Why is that? And I think it's because 80s pop culture, really the pop culture in the 80s is kind of a decade kind of separate, I feel like, from other pop culture. It stands out because there was so much creativity. There was so much individuality. And there were things that were happening in 80s pop culture that hadn't happened before. Or if they were exploding in terms of the genres. I talk about the idea of that 80s pop culture is like a glitter bomb that somebody threw against the wall and all these wonderful colors came out. And that was what was happening in 80s pop culture. And it doesn't feel like it's going away anytime soon, which is great for me, of course. And I love it. And I just think that it's a standalone decade when it comes to the pop culture.
Right. Well, and we'd gone through the 60s and the 70s, which were pretty turbulent times. We had all of the racial issues. We had Vietnam. We had women who wanted to work, all of these various things. And so poor, Beaver Cleaver got left behind. But I think, and that is, I think, maybe part of it, because we look at the 80s and it's like, okay, we survived that. Now what? And we look at the movies in particular, and they really are very different. We were allowed to do and say different things than we had before. I still get a kick every once in a while when like Mary Tyler Moore comes on and they're in two beds. I'm like, how did we ever get little Ricky, right? Or Lucy, all of those things. And the 80s really were a lot about finding ourselves. We'd survived all of that. And so then when you look at it, it is obviously still very applicable. And it's very much a lot of the lessons, and you talk about this in your books and in your keynotes, is very transitionable into the workplace. And I think that's what is so fun about all of these, because we weren't going to have Ward and June Cleaver in the workplace, but we might have a lot of these other characters or situations, and still do, going on now.
Yeah, and so you bring up a really good point about the move from those turbulent decades. And so I think a lot of that was why that individuality kind of exploded in the 80s. And one of the really important themes throughout 80s movies that for the first time, and I talk about this via the movie The Lost Boys, which isn't one that kind of rolls off the tongue from the 80s movies like The Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller, but it is a fantastic, fun vampire movie with Kiefer Sutherland as the head vampire and the two Corys, Corey Haim and Corey Feldman. But there's a really important lesson in that movie that a theme we saw throughout 80s, which is that problem solvers don't come in a one-size-fits-all package.
Right.
And if we think about movies in particular, before the 80s, we could pretty much tell who the person was going to be.
Right. They might have had the white cowboy hat on. They were men.
Yeah.
They were Ward Cleaver, they were Andy Griffith, they were, Clint Eastwood, all of those. And now it's like, well, wait a minute. What do you mean they don't look like or more importantly, they look like me? And I think that was what was so cool about this was we did see the diversity really coming out.
Yeah. And there was diversity on multiple levels because we think
when the vampire's the hero.
Well, but so there's a great example. The Frog Brothers in Lost Boys, the two, if you haven't seen the movie The Lost Boys, they were two kids that worked in their parents' comic book store. They didn't look like they were the kid. If your town was in trouble, you weren't going to the Frog Brothers and saying, help us, please. But they actually were the ones who solved the problem, saved their town at the end of the movie. And we saw this theme again throughout the 80s where you didn't need this. There was a song by Bonnie Tyler, not the main, Holding Out for a Hero was her song. And she talks about he's got to be tough and he's got to be strong and he's got to be fast and ready for the fight. And so we looked at that and I challenged people during keynotes. I say, if I ask you about a hero or heroine from movies, who would you say like before today? John Wayne or Arnold Schwarzenegger, Stallone, or, if we talk about women that were strong physical characters, it was Ellen Ripley from Aliens.
Right, I was going to say Sigourney Weaver.
Sarah Connor from The Terminator, right? But what did they all have in common? They were strong, physically strong. They could use firearms. You would look at them and you would know that person's going to save me. But what happened in the 80s was beginning with movies like Revenge of the Nerds, the protagonists became very different.
Right. The smart people.
The smart people, the ones we didn't expect. And we were rooting for them to win. And this was the first time that we saw this. It gave an opportunity to multiple types of characters and people to be the heroes and the heroines. And it's such an important theme throughout 80s movies that really kicked it off for the decades to come, that anybody could be the hero. Or the heroine.
Right.
Yeah.
So transition that to business.
Yeah.
Because that's what you talk about. And that's, and so how do we bring those characters into the workplace and why are they still so very important?
Yeah. So this idea, again, the problem solvers don't come in a one size fits all package from a business perspective. I think too often we look at the person with the title who has the title and we think, well, they should have the answers to every one of our problems.
That's Sheriff Andy.
And, in a lot of situations where you're a leader, ultimately it's going to come down to you and you're going to have to make that decision, maybe. But this idea that problem solvers don't come in a one size fits all package means that we should be opening up our challenges and our problems in the company to everybody.
Right.
Because how is somebody going to become a leader if we don't give them an opportunity? How do we know that the person who's in a position like data entry, for example, or maybe they don't engage as much with everybody else? Maybe they're not in a position like marketing, like I was in, where most of us are extroverts. Maybe they don't talk as much at work, but that person might be able to solve the problem that the business is having. And so it's so important, as we saw in these 80s movies, to give everyone an opportunity to be the problem solver, to be the hero or the heroine, because they might actually surprise you. And the same thing goes for the movie The Goonies, Sloth. This guy who was chained up in the basement by his family of bandits, not because of anything he did, simply because of the way he looked, his cone-shaped head, his ears that wiggle, crooked nose, missing teeth, and the fact that he smelled like Phys Ed, as Chunk said, right? A lot of things going against him. But what happens? Chunk invites him into the group of Goonies. He invites him into the team, as we think about a business concept, the team. And Sloth actually helps them solve their problem, solve their challenge, and helps them win at the end of the movie so they can save their town.
Right.
The same way that what he does is he shows his biggest traits, or his strength and his loyalty and his heart, because they've invited him into the group. It's the human thing to do, but from a business perspective, again, that problem solver that we've been kind of keeping out here, maybe it's the new employee. Invite that person in right away. You'd be surprised what challenges and solutions, the challenges and problems, the solutions that person might have. So yeah, from a business perspective.
Right. And the culture really is a lot of it. And you do give keynotes on this. And, one of my favorites is, of course, E.T., because I really remember that, and it was such a fun movie. But what did E.T. teach us?
Yeah. So ET teaches us a lot of interesting things, including this idea of kind of including everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But the one big lesson I got out of ET were from two simple words: be good.
Mm-hmm.
And that be good,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the simple surface lesson would be just be a good person. And obviously that's important. But when we think about our companies and our organizations, for organizations and companies to be good, what is your organization doing to give back? And yes, it's nice to say, here's a nice check for United Way, or, you know, and everybody stands there and gets a picture with the big check. And these are important things, right? Because the United Way and these other big organizations, they do fantastic work. But think about it at a community level. What are things that you can do in the community to help? And it doesn't necessarily always mean the organization itself. It could be the individuals or the organization saying, hey, you've got your personal time off. Guess what's not included in that? Volunteering. That's separate, and that's over here. We're not going to make you take a vacation day or your personal day to go volunteer to do something that's important to you. We encourage that. In fact, we're going to give you days to volunteer because we feel that that's important for people to do. There are organizations and companies now that are built around a mission of giving back, something that we never really saw before.
Right.
A great example is Tom's. You know, Tom's, I believe it's Tom's who gives, for every pair of shoes that is purchased, they give a pair of shoes into an underprivileged area.
Right. They make donations to animal shelters and things like that also.
Yeah, that's right. There's the eyeglass company, Warby Parker.
Right.
I think.
Warby Parker does a lot of donations.
Yeah. So you buy a pair of eyeglasses and it provides an eye exam for somebody who maybe can't afford one. Their business model is predicated around doing this giving back. I give back through my books and speaking gigs to an animal rescue that saved my boy Bodie. So there's opportunities for us to do that. This idea of be good, but it has to be a culture thing within the organization. It doesn't have to be the organization. I'll give you one more example. I was working at a big organization back in the day. And of course, we did a lot of things with big charities. But what we did with our marketing department is we went and looked for local organizations that needed help. And so there was this organization that helped kids who had been severely either mentally or physically abused, and they all lived in this home, about 15 of them. And we got our baskets for the holidays that we got from our clients with all this candy and stuff.
Right, that you really didn't need.
Nonsense. So we actually took the baskets over to this home. And we said, we want to, you know, they couldn't believe it. They're like, the kids are going to be so excited because inside of those baskets were, you know, candies and little treats and little gifts. And they thought this was amazing because their kids were going to actually be able to enjoy this instead of put it in the break room for everybody to enjoy who already had those things.
Right.
So be good.
Right. Yeah. You know, and it is, you know, it, like you said, the checks are great, but there's so many other things that you can do. You and I were talking about March Madness right before we started the program because we're both big college basketball fans. And so my women's basketball team, the University of Colorado, made it to the Sweet 16, and you know, so I was having a lot of fun following that. But they were talking about one of the things that they did, and I saw this in just one place, and it was just kind of an afterthought type of thing because they were talking about the coach who was going around with the garbage bag, and I was like, "What do you mean the coach is going around with the garbage bag?" Well, what the young women had done was they had collected all the toiletries from all the various hotels that they were at during their whole progression of Pac-12 tournament, which was in Vegas. So you'd have a lot of toiletries there. And then through the various tournament games. And, you know, and so they collected all of the toiletries and they took them to a women's shelter.
Awesome.
Something simple, something very easy to do, but it made a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's fantastic. I didn't know that story. That's awesome. It's, I mean, but that's what it's about. I mean, yes, again, like these, when there's a big investment made by a corporation into a charity that has worldwide exposure, that's fantastic. But there's so much that can be done at the local level, the community level, but it's up to the bigger organizations to say that we believe in you, we trust you to make decisions at the local level to get engaged and to help. And we're going to support you by saying that maybe it's, you know, instead of the extra PTO, you just say everybody has 5 days a year to volunteer, not to take off. You don't have to use your vacation day to volunteer for Habitat for Humanity or whatever it is that you believe in.
We might do some organized things, you know, things, but yeah, just how can we give back to the communities?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, and I do think that we saw some of that in the 80s movies where they, and maybe it was more that they cared about the underdog. And they really wanted to make sure, as you were saying, that they were heard and that they were valued. And so, yeah, how can you make that difference? With just the little things, do you travel a lot? Okay, fine. Collect the toiletries. The hotel is not going to mind if you're having to get a new bottle of shampoo every day. It is a little trickier now that they don't clean the rooms every day, but you can always go to the front desk and say, I need more, right? They'll give you more.
Yeah. And there's things that you can do. Like, I have a friend who lives in Alaska, and we were talking one day, and this is something that you would never, like, if you don't live in Alaska, you may not think about, but it doesn't have to just be Alaska that does this. So every so often, of course, unfortunately, there are car accidents where a moose gets hit or a deer or something, because there's a lot of wildlife in Alaska, and the state trooper is called, and they have the unfortunate having to maybe put the moose down or the animal. But what do? Instead of just, putting it aside, like so many, I'm sure, states do, they actually, the next phone call is to either a homeless shelter or a soup kitchen.
A food bank.
They come out, food bank, and they come out and they actually get 800 pounds of moose meat. So now, the moose didn't die in vain. It's a terrible thing that happened, but the moose didn't die in vain. And B, they now take this negative and turn it into a positive. And it's really not that difficult to do. It's a phone call. And then there's a local butcher that volunteers their time. And before you know it, you've got meals for families that you didn't have before. That such a simple thing. And those are things that we can do, not even organizations, but at the state level or at the community level, that they can be done as well.
Right. And you can do things obviously at the family level. One of the things we're very involved with a shelter here, a cat shelter. So it's called Good Muse. Love them. That's where we've got our two cats from. And they do a program because the cats are just all running amok in the shelter. Now, obviously, they have some that are sequestered and for a variety of reasons, things like that. And they're cats. They don't always get along, but they love to have young kids, so elementary school kids, come in and read to the cats. Do the cats care what you're reading? No. But more than anything, it's good practice for the kids because they're reading out loud. They're reading, which obviously is good. But it also helps to socialize the cats and all of those various things. And I love that program. I think that's just one of the most fun programs that is out there.
Yeah, and these are great too. And I mean, it's getting involved in the community. But going back to what you talk about with the underdogs, the movie The Breakfast Club has a lot of lessons about individuality and being who you are and being yourself, and how important these lessons are. And they're timeless throughout generations, the importance of being yourself. There's one really great one from Brian, who's the brain. And when we meet him, of course, like, he's awkward and he's not accustomed to being in detention, clearly. And so there's a really important lesson about the underdogs there. And I talk about this idea of how just like the ocean, the really cool things about people are just below the surface. And then the really, really cool things are even deeper below the surface. And so we see people, just what we see on the outside, we may not know them, but when we do get to know them, what we usually find is there's some really cool stuff below the surface. So if you go, I compare it to like snorkeling. If you go snorkeling, you're going to see some cool stuff, right? But it's below the surface. If you're on the beach, you can't see that stuff.
No.
Just like if you're, if you see somebody face to face, you can't see what's below the surface. So you get in snorkel, you see some cool stuff below the surface. Then you go scuba diving and you see some really cool stuff because you're deeper beneath the surface. And it's the same thing in humans. And that's a lesson that we were taught in 80s movies as well, to go beneath the surface, to find out who the real person is and to give them a chance. And that was what we saw in Brian, The Breakfast Club. Ultimately, at the end of it, this whole idea of don't you forget about me, or are you going to walk on by when you see me in the hallway? And initially, Molly Ringwald's character, the princess, she says, yeah, we probably would. But then ultimately at the end, we realize they're not, that they are all actually going to be friends. And they're going to be friends with Brian because they see him for more than just who he is on the outside and that he's the brain. They see him as a human and as an individual.
Right. I'm curious, we obviously had COVID, we had the shutdown. And we still have so much of the work from home, whether it's a hybrid or 100% work from home. Do you think that makes this a little bit more difficult because we've gone back into isolation to some degree?
Yeah, I think not having the human interaction for everybody is difficult. I think for most people, it's difficult. I think initially, like anything, we were talking earlier about my injury that I have to my ankle and how maybe it was telling me something like I needed to take a break from the physical activity that I was going so hard at. And so maybe initially all of us having to kind of scale back and focus on maybe, our kids, our family, our dog, like spending more time with the people close to us. But then, we missed that human interaction. We are human after all. And I do think that presented some challenges, maybe not so much in adults as kids. I don't have any kids, so it's difficult for me to really expand on that, except to say that as adults, we had decades or years of interactions with other humans. And so maybe getting our footing back with that wasn't going to be as difficult as a child who is 6 years old and just starting to develop the understanding of human interaction, and that's taken away for a few years. So again, I can't expand on that too much, except to say from an adult perspective, I still think getting our footing under us was certainly a challenge, but if it feels like for those of us that are extroverts, I missed it. I missed.
Oh yeah.
And I think that it probably was a little bit of a challenge for everybody, but it did teach me to be an introvert as well, which isn't a terrible thing. I think I learned to appreciate time by myself that maybe I didn't have as much of before. So, yeah.
Right. But I think it also gave us the time to think about a lot of this stuff. We're seeing so many people changing. Now, I think we're seeing kind of what I've started to see is a little bit of the reverse. We had all of this, I'm quitting, I'm not going back. Things didn't work out quite the way we thought. But that's okay.
Yeah, there isn't really an 80s pop culture lesson in this one, but I've talked about this as well, that we had.
There's got to be something somewhere.
Well, they talk about the Great Resignation, right? Everybody left their jobs and they wanted to pursue their own thing. And I think as entrepreneurs, you've been an entrepreneur as well, and you understand it's not easy.
Right.
And from, they talk about the grass is always greener, but from the outside looking in, you could say like, oh, wow, the freedom and flexibility to be your own, to do your own thing, to have your own company. Yeah, sure. However, there's a lot that comes with that. And you're not just going to leave that job, that perceived security of the corporate job, and suddenly become somebody who's making as much money as you did, who has as much exposure as you did. That stuff has to start all over again when you're building something. And it's not easy to do. And I think a lot of people realize, whoa, wait a minute. You mean I don't get a paycheck every couple of weeks, and I don't have the stability?
Insurance? I got to buy my own insurance?
I got to do this myself? I don't know. I think we're going to see a great return to the office because of that. And I think the people that stick it out, good for you, because I wouldn't have it any other way. For me, as challenging as it can be, I wouldn't have it any other way. But yeah, I think we're going to see a bit of a great return after the Great Resignation.
Right.
Yeah.
There's got to be a movie. We'll find it. There's got to be something that was in the 80s.
I'll think about that one while we're talking. Yeah.
But it is something that is as you were saying, things are very cyclical. And we go through all of this. But I think part of it too was we saw a resurgence in people kind of looking at the nostalgia, the history. I think we saw the Gen Zs, the millennials, all of those looking at and watching these movies and going, hey, this is kind of cool. It's funny. I look at a lot of them now and I think they probably couldn't make some of those today, right? I saw a reference on it's obviously a little bit later reference, but Jennifer Aniston was saying we probably couldn't do Friends now. For a variety of reasons. But I think it is kind of one of those things where, okay, when you're watching it, just remember this was filmed at this point in time. So, they might do some things that are not not accepted now, but that's okay. But yeah, we did, like you said, we saw those underdog characters, and I keep thinking again about the Breakfast Club. We saw the fact that it was the people who you didn't expect, that you didn't anticipate, all of those things who went, hey, I've got the solution. And I love that. I think that's just a great concept.
Yeah. And I'll tell you another one that actually kind of ties in a couple of these different themes is a movie called Can't Buy Me Love. that came out in 1987, I believe. And Patrick Dempsey, who I say, you know, if you've seen Can't Buy Me Love, and he was
yes. Or was
Dr.
he
McDreamy?
He's one of the mix.
Yeah, he went from like the, you know, the nerdy kid who rode the lawnmower to Dr. McDreamy. So I guess anything is possible. But this movie tied in a lot of those different lessons, Can't Buy Me Love. And so it did teach us about the underdog. Excuse me. It did teach us about bullying, because there's a really important lesson in there, what he does to his best friend. But it also teaches us, you know, don't fake it to make it, because the fall can be fast and unforgiving.
Right.
And he fakes it because he wants to be accepted. He wants to be in the popular crowd. And we think about this idea of acceptance and individuality. And again, it goes back to the idea of just being who you are. And there were so many movies in the 80s that through different lenses and through different characters did teach us that really valuable lesson about be you. It's okay to be you. And that's a really, really important lesson that goes throughout 80s pop culture. And I think, again, sometimes people miss, because they go back and they're watching these movies to either be entertained, or they're not really thinking that they're teaching us this idea of being yourself, because there's the entertainment factor. But Can't Buy Me Love is a really good one when it comes to the concept of bullying, you know, the bullying, the acceptance, the individuality, and then ultimately not trying to be somebody that you're not. Just be yourself. If you be yourself, things will work out. The people, I say the people that, you know, love you and like you will love you and like you. Like, you don't have to be accepted by all these other people over here. It doesn't really matter. Just be you. Be yourself.
Right. You know, and looking back at the movies from the 60s and 70s, you know, they were cookie cutters. You know, that everybody looked the same, they dressed the same, you know, all of those various things. And you're right. When we got into the 80s, it was like, we can be different. And I think a big part of that really was the music. You know, that was, rock and roll started a little bit before that, but, you know, it really took off. And then we had the other genres that, you know, were so popular. But yeah, when you look at, you know, say Prince, you know, Michael Jackson, you know, that was, now I grew up with little Michael Jackson, you know, and you know, and I remember being in 6th grade and we all had to have purple socks because Michael Jackson wore purple socks. And so anybody who's wanting to know how old I am, look that up. But you know, but we looked and dressed the same. And we wanted to be like them. And then when we saw these characters in these movies in the 80s, we went, oh, okay, well, I can do that, or I can do that, or I can do that. And it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So you brought up Prince. That's a great example, because he has a really valuable lesson. Actually, it's 3 lessons from one thing that he did for a musician called Suzanne Vega. Suzanne Vega was an alt singer in 1987. She had a song called Left of Center on the Pretty in Pink soundtrack. And then she had a song called My Name is Luca. And at the time, Prince was like, I mean, in 1987, he was already winning Grammys. He was nominated for Academy Awards. He had a huge catalog of music. He was known by one name around the world, which,
right.
You know,
and that was, well, now we would have had Elvis.
Yeah.
But he was probably about the only one, but you also knew he had a last name. Prince was just Prince.
Prince. Yeah. Yeah. Prince was just Prince. I mean, kind of like, you know, Madonna. And I mean, there was a few here and there, but there aren't too many people throughout world history, particularly entertainers, that were known by one name around the world. And then he was known by a symbol. So Prince is the king of music. And he hears this song by Suzanne Vega called My Name is Luca. I Live on the Second Floor. Really important song, really serious song about child abuse. And he was really moved by it. And if you Google Prince Suzanne Vega, there'll be a handwritten note that comes up from him to her in 1987 after he heard My Name is Luca that says, "Dear Suzanne, Luca's the most compelling piece of music I've heard in a long time. There are no words to tell you all the things that I feel when I hear it. I thank God for you, Prince." And he got this to her in 1987. Now we know this because in 2016, when he passed away, she put it on social media to let people know the kind of guy that he was behind the scenes. And he taught us 3 things with this handwritten note. 1, leaders share the stage of success. Rulers keep everybody below the stage. They don't want to share the spotlight. They don't want to share the stage, usually because rulers have just been placed on that stage. They didn't earn it. Prince had earned that position, so he wanted to share it. He saw her doing something great, and he said, "Hey, greatness, I see you. There's room up here for you." The second thing he did is encouragement doesn't cost a thing. We can all go out and encourage somebody today. A handwritten note encouraged her.
Right.
He couldn't get this by her. There was no digital means to get this through, no email. He had to actually hand deliver this or get a team member to deliver it. Encouragement doesn't cost a thing. And the third thing was that the handwritten note's a lost art. It is nice to get praise in multiple ways, but that handwritten note from a leader to a team member that just it shows up on their desk, it comes in the mail. I saw that you did great on that project. Congratulations, keep it going. Well done, whatever. That handwritten note goes a long way. So yeah, 3 things from Prince with a simple handwritten note.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember I had a boss when I was still in corporate America who he liked to call and leave personal voicemail messages for people. Now he did company-wide ones, and we had a system where you could do that. You could leave a voicemail message that went to everybody, but he also liked to leave little personal messages for people. And, I know people who had them saved on their phone for years. So it's the same thing. You get that little personal touch where, they took an extra 30 seconds out of their day to do it, but it means so much. And we can all learn from that. I posted today on Facebook that it's National Doctor Day. You talk about people who are kind of the unsung heroes. So, next time you go to your doctor, tell them thank you.
Yeah.
Tell the person who brings you your coffee, thank you. Smile at somebody. You might be the only person who smiles at them that day. Or more importantly, track down their manager and say they did a great job.
That's really important.
Know that.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Unless your doctor is Chevy Chase and Fletch pretending. Dr. Rosen. Yeah. I agree. I mean, it's a simple gesture, a smile or words of encouragement. They really do go a long way, and it doesn't cost you anything to encourage somebody at all.
Right.
We all know somebody that needs it.
Definitely. So you and I are both in marketing. So let's talk movies from the 80s that teach us a lot about marketing. And it's funny because when I read the list that you have, I'm like, yeah. But then when you think about it, as you said, we look at the movie, we watch it, we go, well, that was fun. But things like, Christmas Vacation, how can that give us some marketing examples?
Oh, Christmas Vacation. And it's funny. I was just talking about this in a keynote before we hopped on. This lesson from the Griswold family, and of course, Clark Griswold, the lovable knucklehead who always wants the best for his family, but always finds problems trying to do it. And in Christmas Vacation, and by the way, if you haven't seen it in a while, Juliette Lewis plays Audrey, and she went on to do great things. And then if you're fans of The Big Bang Theory, Leonard Hofstadter,
oh, that's right,
plays Rusty. So it's really cool to go back and see the start of some careers in the 80s. He is waiting for his bonus check, and he has his extended family at the house. He's excited to share this news that he's put it in an in-ground pool. He's already put a deposit on it. And with the bonus check, he is going to, if there's enough left over, he's going to fly everybody in from the family for the opening of the pool. So he's already made this investment, and he gets his bonus check, and it's not what he thought.
Right.
It's actually an annual membership to the Jelly of the Month Club. It's not the money he thought it was going to be. To which Cousin Eddie says, well, that's the gift that keeps on giving all the year long. And Clark says, yes, it does. Yes, it does, Eddie. And he pounds some eggnog, and then he goes on this rant about how he's so upset, and he wants his boss, Frank Shirley, brought from his holiday slumber on Melody Lane with all the other rich people. He wants him brought right here with a big red bow on him. Cousin Eddie, bigger heart than brain, decides to go do that. He takes Clark literally, and he kidnaps Frank, his boss, brings him to his house with a big red bow on him. Clark faints when he realizes what happened, and then the SWAT team breaks in.
I'm fired.
Yeah, that's it. I'm done. The SWAT team breaks in to try to rescue Frank Shirley, and chaos unfolds. Why did this happen? Well, it teaches us in marketing to know our audience, because your audience, no matter how much research you do on it, there are always going to be outliers. There's always going to be people that hear your message and don't interpret it correctly, or they don't do exactly what you thought they were going to do. It's so important to know your audience, but then it's also important to make sure that you have built in plans to answer the portions of your audience or outside of your audience that maybe misinterpreted your message a little differently, or have questions about it. Social media, people they're not shy on social media. And if you're a marketing person and they have a question about your messaging, they will ask you on social media. So even if you know your audience, and it's important to, it's also important to be prepared for the outliers like Cousin Eddie.
Right. I love it. And a lot of these movies, and I think this is one of the important things, is they teach us that we have to have a sense of humor about ourselves.
Yes.
And especially if you're the boss, right? How many bosses can laugh at themselves? I mean, let's look at, say, Elon Musk. Don't think that man laughs at himself ever. But when you look at someone else who, is a really good boss, you realize, yeah, they can poke fun at themselves and still be that good boss.
Yeah, and that self-deprecating humor is the best humor, I say. And all of my keynotes, I open up with the idea of, how does one become an 80s pop culture expert? That's the question that's often asked of me.
Right.
And I start with, you have to have awkward family photos. And I show these really awkward photos of me from the 80s. Just kind of loosen it up, lighten up, let people know.
Oh my God, the plaid sweater.
Yeah, or the members only jacket. And the self-deprecating humor is the best humor. It's so important to be able to laugh at yourself. And to laugh in situations where there's challenges as well. Bringing levity and humor to a challenging situation or a stressful situation, particularly if you're a leader with your team, because otherwise people they feel their shoulders creeping up when it's stressed. They're stressed out. They don't think as well. They're not as productive. You have to loosen it up. John McClane in Die Hard taught us a really valuable lesson about bringing levity and humor to a challenging situation. When he's stuck in the AC vent, he did not expect to go to the Christmas party and have to fight terrorists in his bare feet, by the way. But he's stuck in this AC vent, and he says, "I feel like a TV dinner," which those of us that are older,
we remember that the metal,
yeah, he felt like a TV dinner. And then he starts, mocking his wife a little bit, her invitation where she said, "Come out to the coast, we'll have some laughs." And this whole idea of like these terrorists are chasing him, everything's going wrong, there's chaos around him, but how does he keep his feet on the ground and relaxed and calm in that situation? Humor, levity and humor. He's poking fun at himself with the TV dinner, and he's poking fun at his family members, his wife, about this. Come out to the coast, we'll have some laughs. So he's really trying to loosen and lighten things up for himself so that he can clear his mind and make good decisions.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about how it is that you decided to do what you're doing. And like I said, we're marketing people, and we know, and we've already talked about this, how important it is to have that niche. We're not going to sell what we have to everybody. It's just not going to happen. Doesn't matter what it is. It's not for everybody. And so you have to niche down. And so how is it that you really did decide, okay, I'm going to go from corporate America to not just launching your own company and being a speaking, doing keynote speeches and writing books, but I'm going to focus on 80s pop culture. How many people went, okay, Chris? Sure.
A lot. And, and I had a lot of people who were supporting me as well. I had an old roommate who said, finally, you're doing something that you've talked about for a long time. 80s pop culture for me, A, because I know it and I love it. And B, because of what we've talked about throughout this conversation, that I just feel like there's so many lessons in it. The pop culture was so exploded, as I said, like this glitter bomb of creativity and individuality. And so there's a lot to pull from 80s pop culture as well. And I had spoken with somebody who had done something from an entrepreneur perspective, who had their own content. And what this person told me was, find your mountain, climb it, plant your flag, and stick to it.
Right.
Whatever that is, find a mountain that no one else has climbed, plant your flag and stick to it. And I had noted no one else was doing this.
So
not only did I love it, but no one else was doing it. So I could create the market for it. And that's what I did. And also because I just absolutely love it.
Right. You get to wear fun t-shirts.
I do. Yeah. The Karate Kid. Yeah.
Yep. Oh yeah. I think probably there are many of us that have those still in our closets. And now they're like, oh, I can't wear it. I might make a hole in it. All these
Blockbuster in the background, so yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And we were talking about that before the program started. So for those of you who are listening, Chris's virtual background is he is in a Blockbuster store. Yeah. And now all of a sudden, oh my gosh, Blockbuster's back in the news. This is just going to be so bizarre to what the heck is happening with that?
I kind of hope that they're going to open up a few stores in some, markets that would support it, and it might just be quirky enough to do so. I can't remember if it's DirecTV or it's one of the satellite companies.
I think Dish is who bought them.
Thank you. Dish has the brand. So who knows? Maybe they're going to launch a blockbuster streaming channel,
Right.
and I don't know,
Mhm.
but they're clearly going to attempting to do something.
Mhm.
And so I think there's probably about 10 or 12 markets in the US
Mhm.
that you could actually have a physical blockbuster
Right.
store
Mhm.
and probably be successful. Bend, Oregon is the last one on earth. And
Mhm.
they, when I went out to see it, there were 20 people in there buying DVDs,
Mhm.
renting DVDs, renting
Right.
VHS tapes.
Well,
So
people
there's
are
a market for
buying
it.
vinyl albums again to
Yeah.
listen to music.
Yeah, there's a market for it. So I'm excited to see where it
Mhm.
goes. I really think there's a market for it. There is something to be said. There's some romanticism in
Mhm.
the idea of the blockbuster, and
Mhm.
that streaming is great because everything's in the palm of your hand. You can have whatever you want, whenever
Mhm.
you want. But there's some romanticism in not getting
Mhm.
everything you want, not
Right.
having that instant
Mhm.
gratification.
Yeah,
And
you pick up the
wondering,
box
yeah,
and it's empty. You're like,
yeah.
ah.
Or going
Mhm.
and hoping that it's there,
Mhm.
but then waiting by the return bin for
Mhm.
somebody to return it.
I know, right?
I mean, just, and the Blockbuster employee who says, well, if you're looking for that movie, I don't think we're going to get back tonight, but here are 5 movies
Mhm.
that are
Right.
like that one that you might
Mhm.
like.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that human algorithm, I think, was
Mhm.
better than any algorithm we have today.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, because Amazon can suggest similar books,
Yeah,
but really, are they? Or was it just that
not
they
always.
they had the same words in the title or something like that?
Yeah,
But yeah, it was, and your blockbuster people, they, especially if you were there repeatedly, they got to know what you wanted.
yes.
My husband has a bookstore like that we go to in Alabama, where they know what he wants, and they'll pull books for him because and we only go over there a couple times a year because it ends up being a major expedition. But yeah, they know him, and so that level of customer service, I think, is something that was interesting. But yeah, the whole blockbuster thing, it was funny. I saw somebody, they posted online, they said, I wonder if my fine for the one I still have is
Yeah.
and did we rewind? We rewound.
It was like the Seinfeld episode with the library detective,
Mhm.
Mr. Bookman.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, the
Mhm.
book out for all
Yep.
those decades. Yeah, you wonder. Yeah,
Yikes. Mhm.
yeah,
Yep. So, but yeah, but I think what it's also showing us is, again, that nostalgia. We
yeah.
see that, and it's not necessarily that they were simpler times, because sometimes we get nostalgic for things like that. But yeah, because they were pretty chaotic times, especially in the movies and things like that. But it really was something where, when we look back on it because we lived through it, or when our kids look back through it because we make them watch the reruns, it was something where it's like, yeah, this worked then, and it can work now.
It's, every decade has its challenges.
Mm-hmm.
The 80s was no different.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that one of the things about the movies, and I talk about this as well, is that, people sometimes will say, oh, the 80s pop culture can be cheesy. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it can be, but that's not a bad thing. Like the fact
Mm-hmm.
that most movies had a happy ending or a
Right.
good ending,
Mm-hmm.
or they resolved the way that
Mm-hmm.
you wanted them to.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a terrible thing,
Right.
because a lot of times in life, things don't resolve the way
Mm-hmm.
that we want them to. So
Mm-hmm.
if we could go to the movies and see that there's
Mm-hmm.
a happy ending, that there's a solution to the
Mm-hmm.
problem, that things end up good in the end,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that that's a terrible thing. And
Right.
I think you walked into 80s movies kind of knowing that it
Mm-hmm.
was going to end up the way you wanted it to. Not always, but
Right.
98% of the
Mm-hmm.
time, it was going to end up with the person you wanted to be in a
Mm-hmm.
good position to be in a good position.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Kind of like the Hallmark movies, right?
yeah, I guess. I mean, I kind of skip that channel when I'm going through, but yes, I know the
Mm-hmm.
Hallmark Channel, and it's very, very successful, maybe
Mm-hmm.
for that reason.
Right.
So
Yeah, and maybe it is because there's so much going on, and so we kind of need that, and it's interesting because I tend to watch things, if something big is going on in the world, I revert back to watching old things. I remember when September 11th happened, I watched probably 48 hours straight of I Love Lucy.
yeah,
Just because it put your brain into kind of that mode where you could deal with it. But yeah, we go back and we watch those 80s movies where those kids again, and and you listen to the music, and again, all of those things. It's fun to do that, and it's fun to see our kids getting in. And I don't have kids either, but when we see the next generation, and even the generation after that getting into it, that's where it's fun.
And there's some reminders, there's a great lesson from the movie Stand By Me, which is also a great story. And that's a lot, some of the great movies in the 80s were also, they came just like a lot of movies from books and stories. And it was called The Body. It's a short story by Stephen King, but ultimately became the movie Stand By Me. And for my money, the best line at the end of a movie, and it's when he says, a grown-up Gordy, played by Richard Dreyfuss, one of the characters in the movie says, I never had any friends like I did when I was 12. Jesus, does anyone? And that, I talk about that in the context of reaching out to your friends, because I think in this day and age, it's social media. It's easy to follow everybody's life on Facebook or Instagram. And so we feel like sometimes we don't need to reach out because we can see what they're doing. But you talked earlier about, COVID and that lack of human interaction that so many of us had. And I talk about, like, just because you see your friends, putting stuff on social media.
Is that really what's going on?
Reach out and say hello. It will do your heart and their heart some good. It's really important, because those kids that you played with when you were younger, all those adventures, those summer days that lasted a year, it felt like, and all those adventures that you go on, a lot of things that you experienced for the first time happened with these kids that were in your youth that, at one point you all went out, I think they said in the movie The Sandlot, not an 80s movie, but something to the effect of, everybody went out one day to play and didn't realize it was the last time that we'd all be playing together. And so that part of it too, it's so important to recognize that there is a nostalgia, but it's also about reaching out to the people that helped you help create who you are today. And that Stand By Me, that, does anybody have any friends like they did when they were 12? Jesus, is anyone? It's Stephen King, by the way, just for my money, we think about him when it comes to like horror and scary stuff. But his best stories and his best lessons came from the movies, came from the books that he wrote and stories that he wrote that had nothing to do with horror. Stand By Me, Shawshank Redemption.
I know everybody forgets about Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, Stephen King. The Green Mile, another Stephen King one. These incredible lessons in these movies, regardless of whether 80s or not. But
and it's funny because those movies are about one thing, ultimately, friendship.
Friendship. Friendship and forgiveness. I mean, he was great. And Stand By Me is an excellent lesson in friendship for sure.
Right. So what are some of your favorites? So what are your favorite life lessons from the 80s pop culture?
Life. So the Prince one is one of my favorites, just because I love Prince and the handwritten note. But another one, in my newest book, I'm a huge Patrick Swayze fan. So there's a movie called Roadhouse where he plays a bouncer. And at one point he comes into this bar and he's cleaning up the bar and he's firing a lot of the people for doing things in the bar they shouldn't be doing. And he says, he has this conversation with them about how he has these 3 simple rules. There's just 3 simple rules you have to follow. And there's a lesson in here about simplicity and simplicity rules. That oftentimes we make things complex unnecessarily in our work and in our life. We used to say, keep it simple, stupid. I don't know if they say that anymore, but that's what I learned when I was a kid, keep it simple, stupid. And he has these 3 simple rules, about the idea of, never start anything in the bar unless it's absolutely necessary. I'm going to forget the 3 lessons now. The three rules. Don't start anything inside the bar unless it's absolutely necessary. Take it outside. Man, I can't remember now. The third one is be nice. It's just slipping my mind. The third one is be nice. And these are really important lessons, but the lesson really is about simplicity rules. Keep things simple. Don't make things complex, particularly in your life and your workplace. We tend to do that. We call it drama.
People
create drama. There's no reason
I know that's one thing nice about not being in workplace. We don't have all that drama, right?
the first lesson was never underestimate your opponent. Always expect the unexpected. Don't start anything inside the bar. Take it outside and then be nice. So, that's right. And so I have a lot of life lessons in this newest book. That's really where I wanted to kind of drive the focus of it. So there's a lot in The Breakfast Club, another one from Andrew, the athlete, where he says, we're all a little bizarre. Some of us are just better at hiding it. That's all. And I talk about that one as well, because we all look at Andrew, the athlete, as being the kid. What kind of problems could he have? And I talk about beneath the surface, looking beneath the surface. But it's so important to be you and to be an individual, and that, we're all a little bizarre. I'm a little bizarre. It's okay. It's all good. Like, there's nothing
wrong with it. We're not Ward Cleaver and,
Yeah.
and Opie,
Yeah, that's
and
right.
and it is okay to have those, the pink hair and all of those things.
However you express yourself.
Yeah.
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 In whatever
Madonna
way you
with
do it.
her very weird outfits, but we all went, ooh, that's pretty cool, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
so there's some great lessons in the Breakfast Club as well
Mhm.
that I talk about also. So a lot of good life lessons in the newest book. Vision Quest has some great ones. There's a great movie called Vision Quest. If you're not familiar with it, Matthew Modine plays a wrestler who is going to drop a bunch of weight so that he can wrestle a guy in his senior year who's never lost. It's a great sports movie. It's a great life movie. Madonna, it plays a bar singer singing Crazy for You in it, which is
I love
really
it.
cool. If you love Jake Ryan from the movie 16 Candles,
Mhm.
you get one more bite at the Jake Ryan apple because he's in this movie before he left Hollywood for good. And there's a really great monologue in the movie, but there's a lesson about marking the time or making your mark in your life. And that so many of us just mark the time. And it's important to mark birthdays and anniversaries. These are important milestones for us, career opportunities, things like that. But just marking the time and not making your mark. And I don't mean making your mark becoming famous. We talked earlier about community involvement, making the mark in your community, making the mark in your family, making the mark in your organization, whatever is important to you, but making sure that you make that mark. Don't just mark the time. We've got this limited time on earth. What are you going to do to make that mark?
Right. I was talking to somebody on a Zoom earlier today, and I said, I have rescue cats, and oh, that's very cool. She said, I feed the strays.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was like, oh my gosh, for those however many cats she feeds, she literally is a difference between life and death.
Yeah.
Pretty easy,
and
so how can you make your mark? I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. Well, Chris, oh my gosh, we've done it again. We have filled up the hour. So for people who, obviously you have your books, they are on Amazon. And so, and we'll have the link in the show notes. But if someone says, hey, we need you to speak to our group, whether it's virtual or in person, tell us a little bit more about what they can expect.
Yeah, so I can tell you it's fun, it's unique, it's relatable. I'm just a big knucklehead that came up with an idea, and I love being on stage. There was a musician named Tupac who was not in the 80s, but in the 90s, and said, all eyes on me. I really do love the idea of being on stage, but I also I recognize and appreciate when somebody hires me to speak, because my ultimate goal is to make the people who hire me look like rock stars. I'm not the rock star, you are.
You're the promoter.
From being in marketing, the event planners have really tough jobs. The event managers have really tough jobs. I want to make your life easy. And I want people to remember, and ultimately what comes out of this is we're going to have a lot of fun, but I really want people to retain the lessons so that when you go back to your work or life, if the situation arises and you think, yeah, that's right, Prince Akeem from Coming to America, I can apply that to my situation right here. Patrick Swayze from Roadhouse, I can apply that to my situation right here. So what you can expect is a fun, unique, relatable, and retainable, if that's a word, speaking engagement, a lot of fun, a lot of entertainment. And I promise you that I will make you look good as the event manager, the event planner, whoever it is that hires me. We will have a totally awesome time.
Well, how do they find you?
They can find me at chrisclews.com, CLEWS.com. And also Chris at chrisclews.com if you want to email me. And then on all my social media, the links I'm assuming will be in the post, but I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and also on YouTube.
I love it. Well, this really has been so much fun. And especially because, I grew up in the 80s. Well, I was a little older in the 80s, but it was so much fun. We have to chat again. I think this really is just such a good time. But until then, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
Yeah, the final thought I would say is that, there's a movie, Dead Poet Society, near and dear to my heart. Robin Williams, love Robin Williams, and he plays this teacher at an elite boarding school. And we all know the seize the day, carpe diem, but he says something more important to the boys. He says, no matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world. And, that's kind of like the talk. It's important. You can get your words and ideas out to the world via your phone now, where before it wasn't as easy to do that, but now it's the great equalizer. We can all do it, but you got to, walk the walk, take the action as well. What's the action you're going to take? And for me, it's animal rescue, just like you. My dog, Bodie Boy, who's sleeping on the couch behind me right now, he's a rescue. And I talk about how rescued is the best breed. But yeah, it's so important to walk the walk. And I donate a portion of the proceeds from my book sales and speaking gigs to Wonder Paws that saved his life. That's my walk the walk as well. So yeah, no matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world, but you've also got to take action with it.
I love it. Well, Chris, this has been so much fun, and I can't wait to do it again. I'm Deb Creer. I've been having such a fun conversation with Chris Clews. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Thank you, Deb. Stay rad, everybody.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.